The mansion was silent, its marble floors glistening under dim chandeliers as midnight shadows stretched across the hall. A single gunshot shattered the stillness, echoing through the corridors like thunder. Vittorio Romano, the feared kingpin of the Romano Syndicate, staggered backward, crimson spreading across his tailored white suit. His bloodied hand trembled as he reached for the phone on the mahogany desk, gasping with each breath. Vittorio whispered, "It's done. The king is dead," his voice ragged yet resolute as he pressed send. The message flashed, sealing the betrayal. Outside, the storm raged with relentless fury, lightning flashing across the glass windows. Every raindrop felt like a countdown, every shadow a threat. In the distance, footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, but the king lay still, his empire now fractured. The silence returned, colder than before, wrapping the mansion in dread. What had been a fortress of power was now a tomb of betrayal, and the world outside would soon feel the shockwave. The news spread like wildfire across the underworld before dawn. Every syndicate whispered, every rival family sharpened their knives. Luca Romano, Vittorio's estranged son, stood at the city's docks, watching the rain blur neon reflections. His jaw clenched as memories of his father's empire weighed heavy on him. Luca said, "The king is gone, and the vultures are coming." His voice was low, but edged with fury. Once a loyal soldier, now an outsider, Luca knew the empire's fall would pull him back into the shadows he tried to escape. The night air smelled of salt, smoke, and betrayal. Ships moored silently as seagulls cried above, a symphony of unease. The world didn't mourn Vittorio, but Luca carried the wound like a scar. He felt the shifting tide, a storm not of rain but blood, and within it, his destiny was being rewritten. Inside a dim backroom of a cigar bar, rival bosses gathered, smoke curling into stale air. The chatter was low, dangerous, like serpents waiting to strike. Marco Esposito, the sharp-tongued consigliere of a rival syndicate, smirked and said, "The Romano throne is empty, and it won't stay empty long." His words rippled through the room, stirring ambition and fear alike. Shadows played across the faces of men who once bowed to Vittorio, their silence revealing calculations behind every glance. The clink of glasses masked the unspoken truth. Alliances were breaking before they were even formed. Luca's absence was noted, his name whispered with suspicion. The balance of power was cracking, and with it, the fragile peace of the city. Every eye gleamed with hunger, and every silence spoke of war. At dawn, the city was restless. Newspaper headlines screamed of Vittorio's death, but details were scarce. The streets buzzed with rumors, police sirens wailed, and shopkeepers whispered behind shuttered windows. Amid this chaos, Luca walked the narrow alleys of the old quarter, his boots echoing on cobblestone. He stared at posters of his father's face plastered on walls, now vandalized with red crosses. Luca muttered, "They bury him before the earth is cold." His voice carried bitterness, laced with sorrow. He wasn't just mourning a father, but a king whose empire was already being dismantled. Every corner felt like a watchful eye, every silence a trap. The old quarter had turned into a graveyard of loyalty, and Luca walked it alone, carrying the weight of bloodlines and betrayal. By evening, the Romano mansion was draped in black cloth, mourners and soldiers gathering in hushed tones. Candles flickered against marble walls, their flames trembling like the family's future. Priests muttered prayers while guards watched every corner, rifles hidden beneath coats. Luca entered quietly, his eyes scanning portraits of ancestors staring down at him. His heart pounded as whispers trailed his steps, men questioning his return, others plotting his fate. He stopped at his father's casket, fingers grazing its polished surface, voice breaking as he whispered, "You built an empire of stone, but it crumbled with one bullet." The weight of destiny pressed down on him. Betrayal had written itself into his bloodline, and now survival demanded choices darker than loyalty. The mourning wasn't for Vittorio alone, but for an era that had ended in smoke and silence. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days, and the city felt like it was drowning under the weight of whispered lies. Luca Romano stood in the basement of an abandoned warehouse, staring at a dusty table scattered with old photographs. Each image reminded him of the years he had given to his father's empire, years of blood, loyalty, and silence. A younger Luca in uniform, a soldier carrying out orders, stared back at him with hollow eyes. He clenched his fists, remembering the faces of those he had killed for loyalty's sake. Luca said, "I bled for the family, but the family bleeds me dry." His words were sharp, echoing against the cracked walls. In that moment, the line between justice and vengeance blurred, his soul caught between loyalty to a dead father and freedom from a cursed name. The silence of the room pressed heavy, as if the ghosts of the past demanded he choose his side. At a quiet riverside cafe, the world outside moved on as if the empire's fall was nothing more than rumor. Luca sat across from Elena Marino, his childhood friend turned police informant. She was 33, sharp-eyed, with auburn hair tied neatly, her dark suit blending her into the shadows. She leaned forward and whispered, "Your father's death is no end, Luca. It's the beginning of something far worse." Her words cut deeper than she intended. Luca gritted his teeth, the weight of betrayal heavy in his chest. Every sip of bitter coffee tasted like ash. The city's skyline flickered in neon beyond the cafe's rain-speckled glass, reflecting lives untouched by the war brewing beneath. Luca's silence said more than words could. He knew Elena was right. His blood tied him to the very storm he wanted to escape. Yet he could no longer pretend he wasn't part of it. In the Romano family's old training hall, dust-covered mats lined the floor, and broken weapons rested in racks like relics of forgotten battles. Luca paced slowly, the ghosts of his past selves etched into the walls. His father's voice seemed to echo in his head, commanding loyalty with every word. But the memory carried a weight that felt like chains. Across the room, Matteo Romano, Luca's cousin and enforcer for the family, stepped from the shadows. Matteo, 39, tall, scarred, broad shoulders, wore a leather jacket that creaked as he moved. His voice was cold. "The family doesn't forgive doubt. Stand with us or you stand against us." The challenge was more than blood. It was survival. Luca's breath grew heavy as he realized his family wasn't just grieving. They were hunting their own. Loyalty was no longer a choice. It was a battlefield. The docks at dawn smelled of rust and salt, heavy fog rolling across the water. Luca stood by the water's edge, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He thought of Elena's warning, Matteo's threat, and his father's cold body lying beneath marble. His chest burned with the weight of every unspoken truth. Behind him, a truck engine rumbled as crates were unloaded. Weapons, not goods. The city was arming itself for war. A dock worker, scarred and wary, muttered, "They say the Russians are moving in." Luca exhaled smoke, his eyes narrowing. He knew the empire wasn't crumbling. It was transforming. The question wasn't whether the war would come, but who would still be standing when it ended. And in that fog, Luca finally realized he had nowhere to hide from the blood that bound him. By nightfall, Luca returned to his father's study, the air thick with dust and candle smoke. Portraits of ancestors glared down as if judging his every thought. On the desk lay Vittorio's journal, bound in cracked leather, filled with coded notes and names of allies and enemies. Luca traced the ink with trembling fingers, his mind heavy with the weight of legacy. He whispered, "You left me with nothing but ghosts and debts." His words dissolved into silence. Outside the window the storm returned, rain hammering against glass like fists. For the first time, Luca saw the empire not as power but as a curse, a disease that spread through bloodlines. The journal was both a weapon and a burden. In his father's words lay either salvation or damnation. And Luca knew that whichever path he chose, his soul would never be the same again. The church bells tolled as dusk painted the city in bruised colors, mourners flooding the Romano chapel for a service that felt more like judgment than grief. Luca stood near the altar, eyes fixed on his father's portrait draped in black. Faces turned toward him, whispers cutting through the incense-filled air. To them, he was no grieving son. He was a liability, a target, a question mark in human form. Matteo's gaze burned across the pews, a silent warning that family blood demanded obedience. Luca whispered, "You bury him in stone, but he lives in our veins." His voice cracked but carried. He knew the chains binding him weren't just legacy, but expectation sharpened into knives. The chapel smelled of wax, dust, and fear. For every prayer spoken, 1,000 betrayals stirred beneath. This wasn't mourning. It was a silent declaration of war, written in shadows and silence. Later that night, Luca found himself at his childhood home, standing in the bedroom once filled with laughter and innocence. The room now felt like a mausoleum, dust clinging to toys long abandoned. He traced his fingers across a cracked photograph of himself with his younger sister, Isabella. Her smile was frozen in time, untarnished by the world that swallowed their family whole. He whispered, "You left, but I never escaped." The silence answered, heavier than stone. A knock on the door pulled him back, and Elena entered quietly, eyes scanning the room with sympathy. She said softly, "This house remembers more than it forgives." Her words carried both comfort and warning. Luca felt the chains of memory tighten around his chest. The past wasn't dead. It was alive, bleeding through the walls, demanding payment for every ghost he carried inside him. In a dim warehouse by the river, crates of weapons stood stacked like tombstones of wars yet to come. Luca met with a small circle of soldiers, still loyal to his father. Their faces were lined with fear, their voices low as if speaking too loud would draw bullets. One soldier, Antonio, scarred and weary, muttered, "Without unity the family dies." Luca's eyes hardened, the words striking deep. He paced slowly, his trench coat trailing on the damp concrete. "Unity built on lies is no family," he answered coldly. The men exchanged uneasy glances. He could feel their doubt, their hunger, their fear. The room smelled of oil and rust, the silence broken by dripping pipes. Luca realized then that blood ties meant little in a world where loyalty was currency, and betrayal was always cheaper. Every promise in that room was already half broken. The city cemetery stretched endless under a gray morning sky, marble graves glistening with dew. Luca walked alone among the tombs, stopping at the grave of his mother, whose death had long been cloaked in silence. He knelt, fingers brushing across the cold stone, and murmured, "You were the only one who asked for nothing." His voice faltered. Behind him, Matteo appeared, his shadow stretching long against the graves. His words were sharp. "Our family is built on sacrifice, not weakness." Luca rose slowly, meeting his cousin's eyes. The cemetery became an arena of bloodlines, where the dead bore witness to the living's war. The silence was broken only by crows overhead. Luca felt the ground itself judging him, every grave a reminder that loyalty had always ended in blood. The choice was clear: chains of the family or freedom paid in death. By nightfall, Luca met Elena in an abandoned train yard, the air sharp with rust and diesel. Between rusting carriages, the silence felt alive with danger. Elena's eyes were fierce as she said, "Your cousin won't stop until you're buried with your father." Luca's jaw tightened, his fists clenching as trains creaked in the distance. "Then he'll have to dig through ghosts to reach me," he answered coldly. For the first time, Elena saw not the wounded son, but the soldier awakening again. She looked at him with a mix of fear and resolve. The train yard echoed with the weight of their words, rails gleaming under pale moonlight. Luca's path was no longer a choice between family or freedom. It was a road built from both, paved in betrayal, sharpened by blood. And with every breath, he knew there was no turning back. The Romano mansion's war room buzzed with tension, maps sprawled across the table, red lines marking enemy territories. Luca stood at the head, his eyes scanning the men who once swore loyalty. Their silence was thick, their glances sharper than blades. One soldier finally muttered, "The Russians offer protection, Matteo offers strength, Where do you stand, Luca? His stomach churned with unease. He realized the family wasn't choosing unity. It was calculating survival. Lucas slammed his hand on the table and growled, "I won't bow to outsiders or bleed for Matteo's pride." The words cut deep, dividing the room. Betrayal lingered like smoke, unseen but suffocating. Every face he saw was a mask, every nod a possible lie. The empire wasn't crumbling from the outside, it was rotting within. And Luca felt the floor shifting under his feet, as if the mansion itself could no longer carry the weight of broken bloodlines. In the back room of a dim billiards club, Elena leaned over green felt, chalking a cue while speaking in hushed tones. "Someone in your bloodline is feeding information to your enemies," she whispered. The words struck Luca harder than any bullet. He froze, memories flashing, every meeting, every glance from Matteo, every hushed phone call. Elena's gaze was steady, her voice sharper. "This isn't whispers, Luca. I've seen the proof." His chest tightened, the cue ball rolling aimlessly across the table between them. He clenched his fists and said, "Family is the knife you never see coming." The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke clouding the room. Somewhere deep inside, Luca realized loyalty was a theater, betrayal the script, and he was caught in the center of a play written long before his father's death. The docks at midnight were empty, but for the sound of waves slapping steel hulls. Luca walked with caution, the fog clinging like a veil. From the shadows emerged Marco Esposito, rival consigliere, his smirk as sharp as the knife he concealed. Marco said, "Your cousin sells your empire piece by piece. I only want my share." Luca's blood ran cold. The betrayal wasn't speculation anymore, it was transaction. Luca's jaw tightened, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you're buying scraps, but you're feeding fire." Marco chuckled, the sound echoing off the steel containers. The fog swallowed their silhouettes, but Luca knew the truth had already branded him. His family wasn't just fractured, it was being auctioned. The betrayal wasn't a single knife. It was 1,000 hands reaching for the Romano crown. Back in his father's study, Luca pored over Vittorio's journal by candlelight, flipping to pages filled with coded ledgers and names. Each word felt like a confession written in ink and blood. One entry struck him cold, Matteo's name linked to payments from rival cartels. Luca whispered, "So it was always you." His chest heaved, rage and sorrow twisting into one. The storm outside howled against the windows, rattling the glass like bones. Shadows stretched long across the desk, as though Vittorio himself loomed from beyond. The journal wasn't just a record, it was an indictment. His cousin hadn't just betrayed him, he had betrayed the empire itself. Luca's fingers dug into the pages, his resolve crystallizing. If blood had cursed him, betrayal had freed him. And in that silence, Luca swore the war would no longer be fought in shadows but in fire. At the edge of the city's underground fight club, the air reeked of sweat and blood. The roar of the crowd masked the violence in the ring where men beat each other to pulp. "Adieu disorder, and disdain piwal baldin waved out a coup. Hop." Matteo stood at the balcony above, his eyes scanning the chaos with predatory calm. Luca entered from the shadows, every step heavier than the last. Their eyes met across the distance, and in Matteo's smirk, Luca read the truth. His cousin was the betrayer. Matteo raised a glass as if in mock toast and mouthed, "Family first." Luca's fists tightened, his heart hammering. He wasn't looking at an enforcer anymore. He was looking at the traitor who had dismantled everything. The cheers of the crowd drowned the silence between them. But in Luca's chest, war drums pounded. This wasn't family anymore. This was the battlefield where blood would finally pay its debt. The city was no longer quiet. Gunfire erupted in alleyways, car bombs shattered nights, and the Romano name became a curse whispered in fear. Luca stood on a rooftop overlooking the chaos below, the glow of burning cars lighting his face. The empire was bleeding from every direction, Matteo's betrayal fueling the flames. Elena joined him, her voice cutting through the smoke. "This isn't war, Luca. It's slaughter." He clenched his fists, watching men he once commanded, turn their guns on each other. Then I'll be the blade that cuts deeper, he growled, his voice heavy with rage. The rooftop trembled with distant explosions, the streets crawling with shadows, loyal to no one but blood money. The city wasn't waiting for peace, it was demanding conquest. And Luca knew survival no longer meant defense. It meant striking first, no matter the cost. At a hidden warehouse near the docks, Luca met with surviving allies, their faces weary, their loyalty fractured. Weapons were stacked high, crates marked with foreign insignias. Antonio spoke first, voice gravelly. Every man here has lost someone, but if we stand divided, we'll lose everything. The words fell heavy in the damp air. Luca paced, trenchcoat trailing, his boots striking the concrete. We're not fighting for family anymore, he said coldly. We're fighting to stop Matteo from selling what's left of our blood to strangers. The men shifted uncomfortably, torn between fear and fury. Shadows from the single overhead bulb stretched across the walls, like prison bars. Luca felt their hesitation, but also their desperation. He knew this was no army. This was a pack of wounded wolves, dangerous only when cornered. And they were cornered now. The Russians struck first, their convoy of black SUVs rolling into the Romano quarter with ruthless precision. Streets once filled with merchants were now battlegrounds. Luca arrived amid gunfire, ducking behind a shattered fruit stand as bullets cracked overhead. Elena pulled him down, shouting, "They're not just allies, Luca. They're taking the city for themselves." He rose, firing into the smoke, his rage boiling into action. Each shot felt like defiance, each enemy falling like a shadow erased. The chaos raged, civilians scattering, windows shattering from grenade blasts. Luca's veins burned with fury, but he knew this wasn't victory. This was Matteo's plan unfolding, outsiders carving the Romano Empire apart piece by piece. The streets smelled of blood and gasoline, and with every trigger pulled, Luca felt himself slipping deeper into the role his father once wore, a king made of fire and steel. By midnight, the Romano mansion itself became a fortress under siege. Windows were barricaded, soldiers stationed at every corner. Luca stood in his father's study, overlooking the grounds as headlights approached in the distance. "Matteo won't stop," Elena warned, loading her pistol. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Luca touched Vittorio's journal, the ink-stained pages now a battle map for survival. "He thinks betrayal makes him untouchable," Luca muttered, eyes narrowing. "But betrayal only makes a man predictable." The room smelled of oil and candle wax, tension thick as steel. Outside, engines roared closer, the night vibrating with incoming violence. Luca's reflection in the glass looked nothing like the man who once sought escape. He had become his father's shadow, yet colder, sharper. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was the last battlefield where legacy would either stand or be burned to ash. The attack came like a storm. Matteo's men and Russian allies poured through the gates, their gunfire ripping into stone and glass. Inside, Luca led the defense, bullets whizzing past as soldiers screamed and fell. "Hold the line," he roared, voice raw with fury. Elena fired from the staircase, her face pale but determined. Explosions rattled the chandeliers, smoke filling the grand hall. Luca fought with savage precision, each shot a vow against betrayal. Across the chaos, he caught Matteo's silhouette entering through the shattered doorway, calm amid carnage. Their eyes locked, and Luca felt every chain of blood, loyalty, and betrayal pulling tight. This was no longer about empire. It was about survival. The mansion groaned under the weight of fire and bullets. In that moment, Luca knew the family wasn't collapsing. It was being reborn in blood. The mansion burned behind him, flames clawing at the night sky as Luca stumbled into the courtyard, chest heaving with exhaustion and rage. Smoke stung his eyes, but the real fire burned inside his veins. Across the chaos, Matteo emerged through the haze, calm as if he had orchestrated every spark. His smirk widened as he said, "You thought you were a player, cousin. You were just the piece I needed to move the board." The words hit like bullets, louder than the gunfire still echoing inside. Luca tightened his grip on his pistol, jaw clenched. He realized Matteo hadn't just betrayed the family, he had sold it, piece by piece, to forces waiting in the dark. Betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a legacy Matteo had written in blood, and Luca stood at the center of its design. Inside the ruined Great Hall, silence fell as Matteo raised his voice above the chaos. "Do you know who truly owns this city?" he asked, spreading his arms. Behind him, shadows emerged, foreign men in suits, eyes cold, weapons polished. Luca's stomach dropped. These weren't Matteo's men. They were the unseen hand, the hidden syndicate that had fed on the Romano Empire from the start. Elena gasped beside Luca, whispering, "It was never about family. It's bigger than us." The truth carved into Luca's chest like a blade. Every betrayal, every war, every life taken had been orchestrated by this phantom power. Matteo wasn't just a traitor. He was their chosen pawn. Luca's hand trembled on his pistol as rage collided with despair. The empire he thought belonged to blood was nothing but a mask for shadows pulling strings from the dark. Matteo's voice echoed through the shattered hall as he confessed the truth with venomous pride. "I killed him," he sneered. "I killed Vittorio because he was too blind to see the future. And you?" His finger pointed like a dagger. "You were never meant to survive." Luca's vision blurred, rage pounding in his temples. The blood in his veins screamed louder than the gunfire outside. "You killed your own blood for power," Luca roared, voice trembling with fury. Matteo smirked, his words colder than stone. "Power is blood, and I'm the only heir worth claiming it." Elena's hand gripped Luca's arm, her eyes pleading restraint, but the chains had snapped. Luca no longer saw a cousin. He saw the monster who had destroyed everything sacred. Betrayal wasn't Matteo's weapon. It was his identity, and it had come to full bloom. The hidden syndicate leader stepped forward, an older man in a pristine gray suit, his face calm, his eyes cold as ice. His voice was smooth, detached. "You've both played your parts well, but this empire was never yours to keep." The words silenced even Matteo, his pride momentarily broken. Luca felt the floor tilt beneath him, the weight of truth crushing his chest. They weren't heirs, they weren't kings. They were pawns in a global game that had no loyalty, no family, only power. The man continued, "Your father was useful. You, less so. But Matteo," his paws stretched like a blade. Luca's rage ignited, burning hotter than the flames outside. Betrayal upon betrayal stacked until the truth was unbearable. His voice cut through the silence. "Then I'll burn your empire to the ground, and I'll start with him." The hall erupted as Luca raised his pistol, shots cracking against pillars, fire raining plaster from the ceiling. Matteo dove behind cover, laughter echoing like madness. "You'll never win, cousin. You're fighting ghosts." Luca's heart thundered, every breath filled with rage and despair. Elena shouted his name, but her voice drowned in the storm of bullets. The syndicate men fired back, their precision brutal, forcing Luca into shadows. Smoke curled through the hall, blurring the line between hunter and prey. Luca whispered to himself, "If I die tonight, I take the betrayal with me." His eyes locked on Matteo's silhouette moving across the firelit ruins. For Luca, the war was no longer about empire or survival. It was about ending the curse of blood and betrayal with his own hands, even if it meant being buried with it. The storm raged outside as the final battle unfolded, inside the ruined mansion. Luca moved through smoke and flame, his pistol nearly empty, his chest aching with exhaustion. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of fate. Matteo appeared ahead, reloading with calm precision, his smirk unfazed by the carnage. "You can't kill blood, Luca," he taunted, voice dripping with venom. Luca raised his weapon, snarling, "Blood isn't family, loyalty is." Their words clashed as violently as the gunfire that followed, bullets carving stone and shattering glass. Elena crouched in the shadows, eyes darting, her breath ragged. The syndicate men pressed closer, but Luca's gaze never left Matteo. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was the inevitable reckoning between two bloodlines chained by betrayal. Each shot felt like tearing away the last fragments of family, the last illusion that anything sacred remained. The firefight slowed, silence falling heavy as Matteo and Luca circled each other among the wreckage. Their eyes burned with unspoken history, years of loyalty and resentment collapsing into this moment. Matteo's voice was sharp, almost gleeful. "You always wanted his throne. Don't lie to yourself." Luca's reply came low and bitter. "I wanted his respect, something you never earned." The words struck deeper than bullets, unraveling Matteo's smirk into fury. He lunged forward, knife glinting in firelight, and Luca met him head-on. Their bodies collided in violence, fists and steel clashing, shadows twisting against burning walls. Elena shouted Luca's name, her voice breaking as sparks rained down. This wasn't a fight for empire anymore. It was primal, raw, the final battle between two men who carried the same blood, but walked opposite paths, each desperate to erase the other. The knife grazed Luca's arm, blood streaking across his sleeve as pain burned through him. He grappled with Matteo, fists slamming into ribs, the fight animalistic, stripped of all pretense. Matteo hissed through clenched teeth, "You're weak, cousin, just like your father." Luca roared, voice breaking. He was flawed, but he never sold his soul. The words fueled his strength, his fists landing with brutal precision. Matteo staggered back, blood spilling from his lip, but his eyes still gleamed with hatred. He lunged again, knife raised high, only to be caught by Luca's desperate counter. Their struggle dragged across the broken floor, bodies colliding with splintered furniture. The mansion shook as the storm outside thundered, a fitting requiem for bloodlines shattering within. Every punch, every cut was more than violence. It was the end of family written in flesh and fire. The final blow came swift and merciless. Luca twisted Matteo's wrist, the knife clattering across marble before sinking into Matteo's chest in one desperate thrust. Matteo gasped, shock flashing in his eyes as he staggered, his smirk dissolving into a bloody cough. He whispered faintly, "Family, first," before collapsing onto the shattered floor. Luca stood over him, chest heaving, face drenched in sweat and blood, staring down at the cousin who had destroyed everything. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. Elena rushed forward, her voice trembling. "It's over, Luca. It's done." But Luca shook his head, eyes hollow. It wasn't over. Killing Matteo hadn't freed him. It had only proven the Empire's curse lived within his veins. Betrayal wasn't ended. It had become his inheritance, carved into him with every wound. The mansion collapsed in embers behind him as Luca walked into the night, each step heavy, his body battered, but his spirit hollow. Elena called his name, but he didn't turn. The rain began again, washing blood and ash from his skin, yet nothing could cleanse the scars inside. The city lights flickered in the distance, a world moving on, unaware of the war that had ended in shadows. Luca whispered to himself, "The Empire is dead, but so am I." His voice dissolved into the storm. The phone in his pocket buzzed, a call from an unknown number. He didn't answer, but the sound echoed like fate knocking again. As he vanished into the rain-soaked streets, the night swallowed him whole. There was no redemption, no victory, only survival, and the haunting truth that betrayal never dies, it only changes hands.